consent of the releasing executive authority.
Okay.
But there's a cabinet memorandum that...
Can I continue there?
Certainly.
But the cabinet memorandum, when it's written to cabinet, it will indicate that Minister so-and-so has given consent to.
Right. But the actual written consent itself won't be attached to that memorandum?
No.
And you list then the cabinet memorandum itself, requesting cabinet to approve the transfer, and then the third document is the co-signed cabinet minister of the minute of the Minister of DPSA and the President. Can I just stop there? You refer to it here as a cabinet minute, but in your evidence earlier you referred to it as a presidential minute, and you later in your statements referred to it as a presidential minute.
It's a presidential minute.
Okay, so there's a correction that's required at the top of page 13.
That's fine.
It's a presidential minute. And the Minister of DPSA, you were that minister at the time of Mr. Manyi and Mr. Maseko's transfers. Is that correct?
Yes.
And why is it co-signed by that minister?
Come again?
Why is the presidential minute co-signed by the Minister of DPSA?
Is the initiating minister. If you look at it, it's a cabinet minister. It's a requirement.
Right.
It's a requirement to be like that.
It might be something in the Constitution. I'm not sure. Certain things, when the president signs, if they concern the department of another minister, require the minister to sign. It might be or it might not be, but there is a requirement like that in regard to certain decisions taken by the president that may affect a department where there is a minister.
Certainly, Chairperson, it's chapter 5 of the Constitution.
Thank you. I do have a copy of it available. I'll get it in a moment just so that we can check that up. Thank you. So those are the relevant documents. And then before the break, I handed to you what appears to be a template. I called it a sort of pro forma for the type of cabinet memorandum that will serve before cabinet when there is an appointment of a director general. Have I understood the document in accordance with your understanding, Mr. Baloyi?
Yes, it's a pro forma cabinet memo.
Right. And then there's also Annexure B, which I handed to you, which is a protocol about the principles and procedures to be followed for the recruitment and filling of posts of heads of department. Do you see that?
I see that.
Was that operative at the time that Mr. Maseko and Mr. Manyi were being transferred?
The document, I think it is...
I think the question is whether at the time of Mr. Maseko's transfer and Mr. Manyi's transfer, this type of pro forma memorandum would have been what was used normally in such a case.
Exactly, Chairperson.
Okay.
Thank you. If we look at Annexure B, it sets out in the first line of the table that the purpose of the document is to confirm the principles or procedures that apply in appointing HODs and DDGs at national level. And at point 2, it indicates that although HODs and DDGs are appointed by the executive authorities, Cabinet also plays a role in their appointment. And then there's a reference to Cabinet having adopted a protocol document. Are you aware of that document?
Yes, I'm aware.
Right. And then if we go over to what is the second from last page of that document, under item 17. 17 records...
I'm sorry, Ms. Hoffmeyer. We haven't, I haven't admitted these,
Indeed.
and I realize when you refer to them that it's awkward because do you want to attach them to the end of Exhibit NN4.
Chair, I think that makes sense.
Yes,
I'll
then
ask,
the numbering the pagination
can be paginated
continue.
accordingly.
Yes,
So if we can start it just for the
then
record.
maybe we don't make them separate exhibits.
indeed.
Even though also making them separate exhibits would be no problem. We can either do that or just attach them at the end as part of exhibit NN4.
I think it's useful just for future purposes to keep them in NN4, if I may
Yes,
make that
yeah.
suggestion. And then if I can suggest we start with Annex B, and it
Yes.
would be paginated from page 163 then, because that was our last existing page of exhibit NN4.
Yes. Will somebody do the same for the witness?
We will indeed. If I may beg leave to have my learned friend just
Yes,
approach the
to
witness for
assist
that
him, yeah.
purpose. On my calculation, Chair, then Annex D, which is the second document,
Yeah.
will commence at page 168.
The first one goes up to 167.
Correct.
Is the last page 174.
Indeed.
So I'll just place on record that with the addition of two documents, one being Annexure B, another one being Annexure D, or rather one marked Annexure B, the other one being marked Annexure D, exhibit NN4 now goes up to page 174. So 163 to 167 is a document marked Annexure B and written protocol document on the principles and procedures to be followed for the recruitment and filling of posts of head of department and so on. And then the next one is marked Annexure D and is written Ministry for the Public Service and Administration. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. We're indebted. I was able to just look at the Constitution in the break while we were doing that exercise. And I think the section you had in mind is section 1012 of the Constitution. It provides that a written decision by the President must be countersigned by another cabinet member if that decision concerns a function assigned to that other cabinet member. Is that the section that you were referring to in Chapter 5, Mr. Baloyi?
Yes.
Thank you. Then we were concerned with the document commencing at page 163 of Exhibit NN4, which is entitled Annex B, and I had asked us to look at item 17, which you'll find on paginated 166. And at paragraph 17 there, or item 17, it is recorded that in order to allow the MPSA, what is that, Mr. Baloyi?
Minister for Public Service and Administration.
Thank you. To add value and to facilitate the appointment of nominated candidates to posts of HOD and DDG in national departments. National EAs, what are those?
Executive authorities.
Are required to forward information on these candidates to MPSA, which I understand to be the Minister of Public Service and Administration. And then it says, for this purpose, a pro forma letter and a cabinet memorandum containing all relevant information should be forwarded to the MPSA at least 4 weeks before the cabinet meeting. Do you see that?
I see that.
For practical reasons, departments must deal with only one appointment per cabinet memorandum.
Yes.
And then there's a note that certain things must be attached, and that includes a curriculum vitae. Is that correct?
Is correct. Madam.
And then at 19, it's recorded that after Cabinet's concurrence has been obtained, the relevant EA, which you've indicated is executive authority, will issue an appointment letter to the successful candidate. Is that in accordance with your understanding of the procedure?
Yes, Madam.
Now, Mr. Baloyi, I'm mindful of the fact that this is a protocol about the appointments of heads of department, and we're not dealing with appointments at the moment. We're dealing with transfers from one department to another. Is it your understanding that the same procedure is followed?
Madam, even when it comes to appointments, practical, I'm not talking about theoretical, I'm talking about in practice what I experienced. Depending on the situation, you will find documentation referred to the Minister for Public Service and Administration giving a time that is sometimes far less than the 4 weeks. It depends on the situation. That's exactly. And if you can go and dig into cabinet memoranda, the documents referred to ministers of public service, you will find that. So the material condition prevalent dictate what happens.
But can I establish what are not negotiable elements of the process? Must there be a cabinet memorandum?
There must be a cabinet memorandum, yes, madam, I agree.
Must the consent of the releasing authority have been obtained?
In as far as transfers, okay?
Is the answer yes?
Yes.
And must cabinet make a decision about that transfer?
Okay, it's correct.
Thank you.
Well, you probably do understand that when Ms. Hofmeyer asks this question starting with must,
Yes.
she means that she expects you to make a distinction between situations where a certain requirement is a must, is obligatory, and circumstances where there may be departures and that particular requirement is not met. You appreciate that?
Yeah, with that clarification, Chairperson, I indicated that the material condition prevalent dictate what happens. And I've indicated practically that there will be situations where you will get a document calling on you to act, and that comes outside the prescribed timeline.
Yes, but just to follow up from the Chair's question, I understood that evidence, and for example, I think you gave that 4 weeks that we saw referred to in the protocol may be shorter in a given situation. Is that correct?
Yes.
But what I understand...
I'm sorry, just articulate your response clearly so that it will be captured by the record. You did say yes, but I think it might not have been captured. Did you say yes?
Yeah, I said yes. I said yes, Chairperson, because when I say material condition, I'm saying it depends on factors at play when a consideration is done for the appointment.
Indeed.
So you don't necessarily have to say on technicality you are sending this back for as long as, because the issue here is in order to give enough time for the MPSA to do the necessary checking. So if it is possible to do that within a short period of time, so it should be.
Yes. But then just to be clear on your evidence, I then moved on to what has to be the case, what must be the case in any circumstance. And I understood your evidence to be what must be the case on your understanding of transfers. is that there is the consent from the releasing authority, there is a cabinet memorandum, and there is a cabinet decision on the transfer. Are those three things required for a transfer?
They are required.
Thank
And the fourth one, a presidential minute.
Thank you. I did omit that. So those are the four requirements. They must be there in order for the transfer to be lawful. Is that correct on your understanding?
That's correct, madam.
Thank you. I'd then like to go to the transfer of Mr. Maseko himself. You deal with that in some detail in your affidavits. And if I can pick that up in Exhibit NN4 at page 6.
I'm there.
And I'd like to start for now at paragraph D.
Maybe before you start, Ms. Hofmeyer, Mr. Baloyi, I just want to say to you, before you get into this part of your evidence, that this is a very important part of your evidence.
Okay.
I know that you did say at the beginning of your evidence that it's been a long time, and without having access to documents within government, it makes it difficult to remember certain things. So I just want you to know that when it comes to this, it's quite important, and it's quite important that we know if what you are telling us is something that you have a clear recollection of, and we must know if you are not sure, and so on. Okay?
Thanks,
All
Chairperson.
right.
Thank you, Chair. At paragraph D, you talk about being approached. Can you tell us who approached you and what was said when that approach was made?
Come again?
At paragraph D on page 6,
Yes.
you talk about being approached on the matter concerning Mr. Maseko. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you please tell the chairperson who approached you about Mr. Maseko and what was said when that approach was made?
The executive authority of GCIS, who was the minister in the presidency responsible for performance monitoring and evaluation at the time, is the one who approached me.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the person who occupied that position at the time was the late Minister Chabane. Is that correct?
Well, you're mentioning it.
Yes, I want to know if my understanding of the facts is correct.
Was it Mr. Chabane,
It
Minister
was,
Chabane?
It was,
It
Chairperson.
was.
It was, Chairperson. Just that one is not comfortably in a habit of singing names, but it was.
Oh,
Ms.
yeah, it's quite important in this case at
Yes.
least. Yeah.
Yes, and it may be important for the record in due course, Chair, so
Yes.
I will ask for that clarification where it's required.
Yes.
So the late Minister Chabane approached you, and what did he say?
What he said, I think I wrote it in. It's there in the affidavit.
Indeed.
That a decision has been taken that Mr. Maseko should exit.
Thank you. I'd like to probe that further in a moment, but can I just ask you, do you have a recollection of when late Minister Chabane approached you for this conversation?
No, it's around the time. That's what I've indicated, that I can't remember exactly when that was.
Well, can I raise this with you? There's been evidence before the Commission that former President Zuma was overseas between the 25th of January 2011
Or do you want to say, I don't know if it's overseas or out of the country?
out of the country.
Maybe out of the
indeed,
country
is more accurate.
neutral enough, yeah.
Indeed. Indeed. He was out of the country from the 25th of January 2011 until the 1st of February 2011. And there's also been evidence from a number of witnesses before the Commission that there were interactions between former President Zuma and Minister Chabane about Mr. Maseko's exit from GCIS when he was out of the country. So can I ask, do you have any certainty as to whether these interactions you had with late Minister Chabane occurred in that window period between the 25th of January 2011 and the 1st of February 2011?
I'm definitely not sure exactly. I can't remember exactly the date, and I'm not privy to the information of the former president's movement. So I didn't really be factually correct in terms of that.
But could it have occurred in that week?
It's the same question, madam. I've indicated that I can't remember exactly when that happened.
Well, maybe let's put it this way. You will remember that I just said this is a very important part of the evidence you are going to give. So it's important that we understand
Exactly.
what you recall and what you know and what you don't know. You have, of course, been applying your mind to the issue of to the circumstances surrounding the transfer of Mr. Masego from GCIS to your department, and the transfer of Mr. Manyi from the Department of Labor to GCIS. So you have an idea of some of those events, maybe not everything because you didn't have certain documents. So, and you do know that that transfer occurred of both on the 2nd of February 2011. You remember that? You remember that from the documents you have been looking at, is that right?
Yeah, it has been made clear to me by the Commission referring to a cabinet meeting around there. So in as far as that is concerned, I am aware. But
You are aware,
through my recollection, I cannot
You
attest
would
to
not
that.
remember.
Yes, yes.
Okay, now, would you be able to say that even though you might not remember exactly on what date Minister Chabane approached you, but it was before the date on which Mr. Masego was transferred, or would you not be able to say that?
I will be able to say, Chairperson, it was before.
It was before.
It was before because it was that discussion I had with the minister concerned, where I initiated his transfer. I did not become aware. I initiated it. The advice that was required of me was to then say, how do we deal with exit management? Then I advised on 2 options, and and out of those options, I recommended one. So it was definitely before.
It was before. Now, I think on Mr. Masego's evidence before this commission, the announcement to Cabinet that he was to be transferred from GCIS to your department was made during the meeting of the Cabinet, or at the end of the meeting of the Cabinet on Wednesday, the 2nd of February 2011. So, but the presidential minute might have been signed, I think, the following day, I'm not sure. Or the transfer in terms of the presidential minute might have been to the effect that the transfer would take effect one day after the signing of the presidential minute. So when you say before, it was before, would you say before the 2nd, the day of the meeting of that cabinet, or you are saying before the 3rd, or could it have been on the 2nd, on the day of the announcement to cabinet? Or is it difficult to say?
No, it's not difficult, Chairperson.
Yeah, okay.
The presidential minute normally is signed after cabinet,
After cabinet, yes.
because the president exercises his executive responsibility as the executive authority of the national executive in consultation with ministers, and ministers in a collective body called cabinet. So cabinet has to concur first. After cabinet concurrence, then the president signs the presidential minute. So the announcement in a statement by the GCIS is a statement that gets issued immediately after cabinet, after the cabinet that took that decision. So it's either on the same day or the following day. And then before the cabinet take a decision, there has to be a cabinet memorandum that serve in cabinet. And then that's the cabinet memorandum that recommend the transfer. And that's the cabinet memorandum that ignite a discussion in cabinet that decide to concur.
Yes.
And it is that concurrence that then gives the president the authority to sign the president minute. I think in that sequence.
Yes.
But before Minister Chabane, because when I had a discussion, and I've indicated it there, when we had a discussion, and I proposed that Mr. Maseko we should consider two options. Either to redetermine his contract and allow him to go, and I was not for that. It was actually not my liking that at the slightest situation or slightest moment occurring, we should kick DGs out of place. And then said, let's look at, if we have, the only route is redetermination. If we can transfer him. And when we discussed that, we agreed with Minister Chabane that will only happen if there is if he agrees himself, which is what I advise. And we agreed that both of us should consult him individually. So I can imagine that when the decision, if the decision of cabinet was on the 2nd, it's a decision that should have been preceded by these interactions.
The consultation.
The consultations.
Now, are you able to say the approach to you by Minister Chabane was or would have been a few days before the cabinet meeting where the announcement was made, or would you say it may have been weeks before, it may have been months before? What are you able to say in that regard?
I can't remember, Chairperson, exactly as to when.
Yes. Yes.
I can
Yes.
recall as to exactly
Yes.
when
Yes.
that actually happened.
Yes.
But there's a letter that Minister Chabane wrote,
Yes.
and which letter I got from the commission, and which letter will be helpful to deal with such issues.
I think Ms. Hofmeyer will take you to that letter at the right time.
Okay.
Are you able, would the date of that letter assist you to say maybe it was a few days before, or when we get to it, we
Yes.
might not have to get to it, but Ms. Hofmeyer might decide, let's go to it immediately if that's going to help. Do you think it might help you in terms of estimating?
I think so, Chairperson.
It may, okay.
Chair,
Ms.
and
Hofmeyer?
Mr. Baloyi, you'll find it in Exhibit NN5,
And then 5.
and you'll find it at page 43, 43.
Did you say 4-6?
43.
4-3.
And then 5, you see.
Have you got NN5? Have you got NN5?
And it's page
Just go and
43.
assist him to, you need to look at the spine of the file to see whether it is NN5 or not.
Mr.
And
Baloyi, I
then-
think you might be in NN 1 to 4. The other file, the large file in front of you, is
This one.
probably exhibit
Oh,
NN
yes,
5.
yes, 5.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then if you go to page 43, 43,
Page 43.
yes, that's the letter I think you're referring to, but you can tell me if I'm incorrect.
It says page
43.
Page 43. Page 43, you look at for page numbers, you look at the red numbers at the right-hand corner at the
Oh,
top.
the red numbers.
Yeah, the red numbers at the
okay.
top.
Okay.
Look for, when you say 43, it's 043, but we
okay.
we don't say zero.
I'm there.
You are there, okay. Ms.
Mr. Baloyi,
Hofmeyer,
is
do you
that
want
the
to take it
letter
from there?
you were referring to?
Yeah, this is the letter I'm referring to.
That letter is dated 2 February 2011, which would be the Wednesday of the cabinet meeting. Can you see that?
I see that, Chairperson.
Yes. And it is addressed to you
It's addressed to me.
by Minister Chabane.
Yes.
It says, I concur subject to the President's approval with the transfer of Mr. T.J. Masego, the Director General of the Government Communication and Information System, GCIS, in terms of Section 12.3A to the post of Director General of the Department of Public Service and Administration, DPSA. The proposed effective date of the transfer, namely the date following the date that the President signs the President minute, is also supported. He signed it on the 2nd of February, the
Yes.
same date of the cabinet meeting.
Yeah.
When then do you think he approached you?
I think it could be that week before.
During that week?
Before the
Before
second.
that, yes.
Yeah.
And you are fairly confident that it must be during that week? I'm not saying you are certain.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm just saying you are fairly confident.
I'm fairly confident,
Yes,
Chairperson.
yes, okay, all right. Thank you, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Baloyi, if I can then ask you to go back to your affidavit, which is in NN4, which is the other file you had in front of you a moment ago.
The other file, okay.
We're going to NN4.
Indeed.
Oh.
Chair, and if I can suggest, Mr. Baloyi, just to keep NN4 available to you, because we'll keep going back into it.
NN5.
NN4 for the
Yeah.
moment, because Mr. Baloyi put that away when he moved to NN5. So my
okay.
suggestion is just to keep it available,
Yeah.
because we'll be working with your statements, and then on occasion we'll have to go to NN5
No
for a
problem.
document.
No problem.
Okay.
So I asked you to go back to NN4, and then if we could pick it up at page 14, 1-4, because here you start to give more details about that interaction that you had with Minister Chabane.
Yeah, I'm there.
And you've given evidence on this a moment ago in your testimony. If you pick it up at paragraph B on that page,
B, yes.
you say there it was in that discussion, and you're describing a discussion between yourself and Minister Chabane, where I made a proposal for Mr. Maseko's transfer to the Department of Public Service and Administration after it came to light that there was a decision for his exit.
Yes.
What does that mean, Mr. Baloyi? What was communicated to you about from Minister Chabane?
It communicates that there was an executive authority's position that Mr. Maseko's exit should be managed. And that's the advice he was coming to me for.
And can I just be clear?
Before we go further, was this discussion over the phone or in a meeting between the two of you?
it was not over the phone.
You were,
But
you-
I mean, I can't remember exactly where were you. See,
but it was not over the phone.
No,
So
it was
you
not
were
o-
together.
we were
you-
together.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
And as I have your testimony, he said it's a decision of the executive authority. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did you understand that to mean? Did you understand it to mean it's a decision of Minister Chabane or it's a decision of the presidency?
Now, the executive authority, who's a line function minister and principal of Mr. Maseko, was Minister Chabane.
So he conveyed to you it was his decision.
No. What he said is that there is a decision as to with who he consulted, because you remember, madam, the responsibility to appoint and to decide, to appoint and to transfer and to initiate exit has to be supported by the president. So I did not ask details as to whether you, as minister, did you approach the president. He then said there's a definite decision that Mr. Maseko has to leave. And as Minister of Public Service, can you assist us with exit management? That's when then I came in.
Before you proceed, Ms. Hofmeyr, I wonder whether, Mr. Baloyi, as far as you can just tell me that conversation between the two of you as you remember it. This is what Mr. Chabane said, this is what you said, until you finalize the issue in that discussion.
Thanks, Chairperson. The initial point was that I'm being informed there's a decision, Mr. Maseko has to leave. And then the advice we need from you is on the exit management. And then we'll discuss about that, because my input in the discussion was that is it him who initiated the decision? And the answer was no, it's not Mr. Maseko. When I say him, Chair, I mean...
Yes,
Yeah.
you mean Mr. Maseko.
Yeah, it was not Mr. Maseko who initiated the move. So, and I understood what that means. And then I gave an advice in our discussion. And what transpired in that discussion was when I indicated that, Chief, I personally have a problem, because it's a bad reflection of for our public service to have DGs kicked out at any opportunity that we feel like doing that. Does not augur well for stability in the public service. And then the route that we can do, but if there's nothing that we can do, because if you get to understand that there is what's referred to as irretrievable breakdown of trust, and which is a common thing. You have to then manage that one out, because I asked, is there anything wrong that he did? And the issue was, no, there's nothing wrong that has been done, but the decision is that he needs to exit. And then that's the discussion, Chairperson.
So, is my understanding correct that what you are saying is that he approached you, that is Minister Chabane, and said that a decision has been taken that Mr. Maseko should leave GCIS? Is that right?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes. And that he was seeking from you an advice on how to manage that exit.
Correct, Chairperson.
That's right. And that you asked him the question whether it was Mr. Maseko who had initiated his departure from GCIS.
Yes,
Is
Chairperson.
that right? And the answer was no.
Yes, Chairperson.
Yes. And you then say you understood that. Is that right?
Yes, Chairperson.
So then, from then you began to give advice, is that right?
Yes, correct, Chairperson.
Okay, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. If we can then go to page 7 of Exhibit NN4, that's still in your affidavit.
I'm there.
At G on that page, you say, I discussed with his principal, that's a reference to Mr. Maseko's principal, and obtained concurrence. Do you see that?
That's correct.
Who is the principal you're referring to there?
Minister in the presidency.
That would be Minister Chabane at the time.
Yes.
And then at H, you say, I discussed with Mr. Maseko and got his consent. Do you see that?
That's correct.
Mr. Baloyi, Mr. Maseko's evidence before the commission is that you did not obtain his consent prior to the announcement of the transfer in the cabinet meeting on the 2nd of February 2011. Are you aware that that is his evidence?
In fact, he says he had no discussion with you on his transfer before the announcement of the transfer, of his transfer in cabinet.
Yes, thanks, Chairperson. Thanks, Madam. I became aware of that version when I received the affidavit from the commission. And as I've indicated there, I became so surprised to get to understand that, because as far as I'm concerned, from my recollection, I had a discussion with him.
Well, Mr. Maseko, in answer to some of the chair's questions when he gave evidence last month in November, said that he thought you might have been confusing two different discussions. He said that he recalls a discussion with you when he was in DPSA after he'd been transferred and he was coming to talk to you about exit. And he said in the course of that meeting, he discussed the fact that he wanted to leave public service. And he says his assumption is that you may have concluded that, confused that later conversation with a conversation that occurred prior to his transfer. Do you have a comment on that?
Or maybe that didn't occur.
That didn't occur, indeed.
Yeah. He said he never had a discussion with you about his transfer from GCIS to DPSA prior to the day when he called you to tell you he was your new DG. He says prior to that he had no discussion with you whatsoever, but he says after spending some time in your department as DG, he did have some discussion with you around the possibility of him leaving your department. And he says some of the things that you say in your affidavit, maybe it's one, I'm saying some of the things, maybe it's one thing. He says, no, that is something we discussed at the meeting when I was about to leave DPSA. It's not something I discussed with Minister Baloyi before my transfer from GCIS. He said, I think former minister may have been genuinely confused about which discussion happened when.
Thanks, Chair. And ma'am, because you raised it, that he said I could be confusing these things. I wouldn't use that strong word.
Well, maybe we must say, my understanding of his use of that word was that he didn't mean anything bad. He was simply saying it's been a long time.
I see.
And I think that's what he meant. That's my understanding. Yeah.
In that context, Chairperson, because I thought I would use the very same word, but it was so strong to me, I can't refer it. But in that context, I can actually say most probably, because that is his version, most probably if there was any confusion, it could be on his part. I'm quite clear, Chairperson, that I had a discussion with him. And our discussion went very far. We talked about quite a number of things. He indicated to me, because there was not a lot of time remaining for the expiry of the contract. And that's where I committed that, no, Chief, if we look at this thing, and if it may so happen that the time of your a contract comes to expire and you are still here and I'm still here, I'm even ready to extend that. We discussed that about a lot of things. So I did had a discussion with him. I'm not confused about that.
Well, would there be other aspects of that discussion that you recall that you can tell me about? Obviously,
Yes.
something that's that you may say, just to indicate you recall that discussion with him quite well.
In our discussion, Chairperson, we even went to a point where I then said, if you think maybe as a DG, at a slightest opportunity that the minister decide to then say, go, you are actually vulnerable and stuff like that. I mean, we discussed even about a possibility of him becoming my advisor. I raised this thing with him. And the other thing, Chairperson, was that he then said, no, look, even if I come and work with you, I have made up my mind. I'm not going to belong in the public service. I've got other options to pursue. That was part of the discussions that we had. Because I was trying to prevent a situation where under a cloud, he then leaves. Because if you redetermine the contract, I mean, in public eyes, there's nothing else other than that DG has been fired. And it doesn't augur well for stability in our public service. Those are the things that we refer to. So, honestly speaking, I'm not confused, Chairperson, about this thing. These are discussions that took place between us, the two of us. And it was part of the agreement I had with Minister Chabane to then say, let's consult him individually. And when Minister Chabane wrote this letter, it was I having given him feedback of the consent that was there. So, well, it's up to him. That's
So
his
you are
wish.
quite clear.
Come again?
You are quite clear.
I'm quite clear,
Yes.
Chairperson.
And was this discussion with him over the phone, or you had a meeting with him?
No, Chair, it was not over the phone.
You had a meeting with
I
him?
had a meeting with him.
Yes. And would you recall whether that meeting may have been the day before the cabinet meeting?
That was the day before I gave feedback to Minister Chabane.
Yes.
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 And
So
I'm not sure. Sorry, Chair.
So it would have been before the Wednesday when the announcement of his transfer was made to cabinet. Your meeting with him.
What can also help is access to the cabinet memorandum.
Yes.
Because the cabinet memorandum, as the pro forma indicate,
Yes.
has a date.
Yes, yes.
And the cabinet memorandum can be only developed when you have satisfied this,
Yes.
this requirement. Yeah.
Yes. And you think in that memorandum you may have referred to the fact that you had a discussion with him or something like that, or not necessarily?
Yeah, Chair, in the transfer, if it's a transfer, in the cabinet memorandum, cabinet would like to see if there is consent from the releasing minister, if there is consent from the receiving minister, and actually if it's concurrence from the two ministers, and if it's consent from the official to be transferred. It has to be indicated in the cabinet memorandum. So if we can have access to that,
Yes,
it might
but-
actually clarify that.
But I'm not sure whether anything in such a memorandum, if we find it saying that there was consent from his side, would help, because I think that my understanding of his evidence is that ultimately the transfer did happen with his consent. But the point is, what gave rise to the need for his transfer? Who initiated, where did this idea that he should be transferred come from? Who did it come from and why? So if your memorandum would reflect that he has consented without saying that the consent, without saying that there was a discussion between the two of you, it might not help on this particular issue. But if it were to say that you had a meeting with him or you had a discussion with him, maybe that might help. But you might not be able to remember whether it would say anything like that.
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks.
Yes.
I may not be able to
Yes.
recall. And on the decision, which is the reason for the exit, like I've indicated, that is purely outside the position, the mandate of the Minister of Public Service and Administration.
Yes.
All what the Minister for Public Service and Administration was to do was to advise or facilitate the exit.
The exit.
And I had to find a comfortable exit. And for me, at the time, the comfortable exit was exactly around not taking him out of the public service, keeping him within.
Ms. Hoffmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. There are a few aspects of your recent answer I'd like to pick up on, Mr. Baloyi.
Yes, ma'am.
As I understood your testimony, you said when you were recounting for the Chair what occurred in this discussion with Mr. Maseko, you said you were discussing how there was not much longer left on his contract. Do you recall that?
How the what?
There was not much time left on his contract. Do you recall saying that? That his contract was coming to an end fairly shortly when you had the discussion?
I think I mentioned that when I talked about my offer.
Yes.
To then say, even if it was to be, because his concern was that, no, it's the same, I take you in, you take me in, it's in no time my contract expires, or at no time you also decide I leave. So what did they use? That's when I then said, no, we can look at this thing, because the decision I took to have him was looking at the value that he can actually add in the department.
Yes, and as I understand your testimony, that is part of what you recall about the discussion that you recall occurring before his transfer.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, that would have had to have been that conversation towards the end of January 2011. Do you accept that, based on the time that we've worked out with you in your evidence?
You're saying it will be?
The conversation prior to Mr. Maseko being transferred on the 2nd of February, your evidence previously was it could have happened in that week before. Do you recall saying that?
Madam, I've responded to that, and then keeping on harping on the same issue is to push me to a point where I will have to then say, look, yes or no. I have responded to that question.
No, Mr. Baloyi, she's not pushing you to anything. She is just wanting to make sure. She has a question that she wants to ask you. But before she asks you, she wants to make sure that she understood you correctly. She just wants you to confirm that you said that the consultation between yourself and Minister Chabane happened during that week.
Yes.
So, which is what you said. All you need to say is, yes, it happened during that week.
Exactly,
And then she asked the next question.
Exactly, madam.
In January 2011, there was still 18 months left on Mr. Maseko's contract. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
So why would he be saying in that context that there's a very little bit of time left on the contract?
18 months is a short period of time compared to 3 years, compared to 4 years, compared to 5 years.
So in that context, you understood 18 months to be a short period of time.
No, I did not raise it myself. It was in our discussion.
Is it not possibly more likely that when he was discussing with you his exit from DPSA, which was later in 2011, around July, as I
yes.
understand his evidence,
Yes.
when there was less than a year left on his contract, that's when you might have had the discussion about there not being much more time left on the contract?
No, that's not. I mean, that's exactly not.
Can I ask you, as I did with regard to your discussion or conversation with Minister Chabane, can I ask you to just take me through your conversation with Mr. Maseko as it happened? The two of you met. Can you just take me through that conversation as far as you are able to, in the light of the lapse of time? This is how the subject was introduced. You must have introduced the subject yourself, and then the discussion up to the end, as you remember the discussion.
Yes, thanks, Chairperson. As I remember, I indicated to him that your principal has indicated to me that we need to manage your exit. And I then introduced the option. I then indicate that in our discussion, I proposed to him that there are two routes to deal with that. Either we take the route of redetermination, in which case I'll get officials from the department to calculate as to what the separation package is going to be. It's a fair mechanism of exit if that has to be. But I indicated that, but I also identified that we can also look at the other option, that of retaining you within the broader public service through transfers. That's how I introduced the matter. And that's when we discussed up to a
And
point.
what was his response?
His response was, I indicated to him that if I would prefer the one of, I recommended to him the one of transfer. And he gave consent, said, it's okay, let's work on it, but do know that I've got other options. My stay in the public service, I have been around. And of course it's true. I have been around, I was a member of parliament, or so I have been around. I don't think I still have more time in here, and I've got options that I'm considering. So that is the discussion, but ultimately I got his consent.
Did he raise any questions with you as to why he was required to leave GCIS? Did he say anything? Did he raise any question, or did he express any unhappiness to you about him having to leave GCIS and so on? I just want to get as full a picture of that discussion between the two of you as possible.
Chair did not indicate to me why or what he was told as the reasons for his exit, because he was aware also, because when I indicated to him, said, no, my minister has informed me about that. So he didn't go in, and I didn't inquire more than that. That would take, in as far as whether he was happy about that or he was worried about that, normally, I mean, for a contract employee to have his contract having to come to the end, not initiated by him, but obvious reasons, I mean, it can be expected that it's a cause for concern.
Yes, Ms. Hofmeyr.
Chair, if I may pick up on that. Mr. Maseko's evidence was that he was informed that he would need to move from GCIS by Minister Chabane over the weekend prior to the meeting of Cabinet on the 2nd of February. I understand your evidence to be when you had this conversation with him, he had already been told by Minister Chabane that he needed to move. Is that correct?
Yeah, he said he was already told. And
Do you recall if you met him on a weekend or a weekday?
no,
You don't recall.
no.
Okay, but if Mr. Maseko's evidence is correct and he got informed on that weekend, I think his evidence might have been the Sunday, but we can confirm that it was definitely at some point of the weekend. That would have left the Monday and the Tuesday before the Cabinet meeting on the Wednesday to have had this meeting with him. Do you accept that?
You think?
If he had only been informed that he was going to be moved from GCIS on the weekend prior to the meeting on Wednesday, then the weekdays left during which you could have met with him to have this discussion were either Monday the 31st of January or Tuesday the 1st of February. Do you accept that?
Well, I have no comment on that.
Right.
It's his version, it's not my version, that he was told on a Saturday and stuff like that.
Indeed, but you don't dispute that it might have been that the meeting you recall happened on the Monday or the Tuesday.
I cannot dispute or confirm, madam.
Thank you. Mr. Maseko's evidence was that during those 2 days of the week prior to a Cabinet meeting, he, I forget what he said he sort of goes underground because he needs to prepare for that Cabinet meeting, being the Cabinet spokesperson. And so he goes through all the memoranda that are before Cabinet, etc. And he said it was for that reason, again, highly unlikely that he would have had a meeting with you in those 2 days. Do you still say that that evidence before the Commission of Mr. Maseko was false?
I never said Mr. Masego's evidence was false. I never said. I said I respect his version, in as much as he has to respect mine.
Well, Mr.
So I can't respond there, madam, and say, I'm saying it was false. I'm not saying that. I never said that. I will not say it, because for me, you can only say false if you know that this person is saying something deliberately knowing that that is not the truth. So I'm not at that space, and it's not my version, it's his.
Mr. Baloyi, I'm not asking that you take a view on whether what Mr. Maseko said was deliberately false. As I understand your evidence, it is that you are certain that you had a meeting with him prior to the 2nd of February, at which you discussed his move to DPSA and in which he gave you consent to being transferred to DPSA. Is that your evidence?
The point I said is that in my discussion with Minister Chabane, we agree that both of us should consult him individually. And then you say it was on a Saturday that he was informed. And I'm saying I can't remember when was it that I actually had a discussion with him.
And Mr. Baloyi, that's why when I asked the most recent question, I didn't put a time on it. Because it's very important for this commission to get your evidence absolutely clear on this, because Mr. Maseko's evidence is absolutely clear on this.
And I think mine also, I think mine also is clear. The decision may be yours to decide, not
mine, certainly.
Not to accept it as clear. And as far as I'm concerned, my evidence is clear.
And that is to be...
Maybe, do you think Mr. Maseko must be mistaken in saying that he had no discussion with you about his transfer before the announcement to Cabinet?
What I'm stating clearly, Chairperson, is that I had a discussion with him.
Yes.
So you have two versions here.
Yes,
Richard Baloyi's version
yes,
and Themba Maseko's version.
yes,
They are not aligned.
yes,
But if they are not aligned, there is no suggestion that this one is more correct than the other one. I'm speaking about what I know, Chairperson, and
yes,
and
yes.
and I
Yeah, you
I
can
never
say-
lied.
You
and
can say no more. You say this is what you know to be the
that's
position.
what I know, Chairperson. Exactly.
But I think the question that Ms. Hofmeyer was asking, and also the one I was asking, is just to see whether you have any reason to think he has a different version because of anything other than maybe a bona fide mistake of what happened because of the lapse of time, memory, or is it possible that you think there might be some other reason why, or whether you might be thinking that he knows what the truth is. He knows that the truth is what I am saying, but maybe he has another reason for not saying the same thing as which I'm putting forward because it is the truth. Or you say, look, I believe that if he says he had no discussion with me before the announcement to Cabinet, I have no reason to believe he is deliberately misleading the Commission. It must be that in good faith he thinks there was no discussion. But from my side, I'm saying there was a discussion. And then that's what you are able to say.
Exactly, Chairperson. That's what I'm saying.
That's what
I
you are
mean,
saying.
me and Maseko are coming to talk about these things now. Same period lapsed. I never, in fact, there was never any bad blood, anything between us.
Yeah.
I
think he says the same thing, if I'm not mistaken.
He says the same thing.
Yeah.
I think it's right. I mean, I never, that's why I was surprised about other things. I'm sure we'll come to those questions. So it could be, but the fact is, and I want the Commission to accept that I'm not fabricating this position, that I had a discussion with him. So that is the thing. And that's why I'm sure the investigators may have indicated on the first day when I came to meet the investigators, I said, but is it possible that we can meet? And really, I was so surprised. And I'm as surprised as it is now. But as you have said, Chairperson, the possibility is the cracks of oblivion that I spoke about earlier on may not only be affecting one person, may be affecting both of us. So if there is a way of establishing, you might find that, or maybe the truth is more, or the reality is more on his side, or the reality is more on my side. So there is no malice.
Yeah.
There is no malicious intent.
Yes.
It's the question of recall.
Yes.
And when you deal with recall over a period of time,
Yes, yes.
you
Different people might have
different people may have different.
recollections.
Unfortunately, there is no file you can go and look at because we're not taking minutes of our discussion.
Yes,
So that's the issue.
Yes.
So you're right, Chairperson. That's exactly. I'm not saying he's lying. That's why I even said I didn't use a strong word to him.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can use a strong word to any other person, but I must have a reason. And there's no reason that I can use to him
Yeah.
because there was really no bad blood.
Okay. Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go to the process again for transfers, which you've outlined for us. Mr. Baloyi, there have been engagements between the Commission and the Office of the Presidency in relation to that 2 February 2011 Cabinet meeting. This was made known at the evidence of Mr. Maseko, but at that stage we had not yet obtained an affidavit from the Office of the Presidency. We have subsequently obtained that,
Okay.
and it has been added to NN5. I'll take us there in a moment, if I may. But the evidence of the Presidency is that they've gone back and checked the minutes of the cabinet meeting of the 2nd of February.
Okay.
And there was no cabinet memorandum that served before cabinet on that day about the transfers of Mr. Mani or Mr. Maseko. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware. You remember I requested that some of the documents with the investigators, some of the documents that I requested was, please let me have a copy of the CAB memo.
Yes.
I didn't remember that, and if that's what the presidency is saying, let's leave it as the testimony of the presidency. It's not mine.
Right. But I understood your evidence earlier was that you can't recall whether you were in fact present at that meeting of cabinet on the 2nd of February. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe, yes, I answered that question. I said it's right. Maybe because you say the presidency has indicated, referring to the minutes, have they indicated I was present?
That we are following up with them on over the break, because
Okay.
I had understood that it would likely be common cause that you weren't at that meeting. When you raised it in your evidence earlier, we've been making efforts. Can I just explain? We've never received the minute of the 2nd of February, because the way, if we had, we would quickly be able to check the attendance, right? But the processes of the Commission are such that cabinet minutes are generally classified. So we have to engage a process to request declassification. And in order to do that, we need to identify the items in the minute in respect of which we require declassification.
Okay.
So what happened is we engaged with the presidency. We said, go to the minutes of the 2nd of February 2011 and declassify so we can receive the minute anything dealing with the transfers of Mr. Mani and Mr. Maseko. The consequence of that is that they went and checked. I'll take you to the affidavit now. There is no recordal of any discussion whatsoever in cabinet on that day, nor a decision taken by cabinet on that day relating to the transfers of Mr. Mani and Mr. Maseko, nor any cabinet memorandum in relation to those transfers. The consequence of that is we don't get the minute because what we identified for declassification doesn't exist. I just want you to understand the processes,
I see.
right? So the evidence of the president.
Maybe, Madam, I should comment there. If the evidence you have is that there was no CAB memo, but there was an announcement, then that's a question that the Chair of Cabinet definitely can talk to. It's something that falls outside. Even if I'm there, if things happen like that, it means it would have happened like that. But like I said, I don't recall. But I think the Chair of Cabinet will then do, because it will be something that I'm not sure is unheard of, that appointments are done through announcements and not done through the necessary processes.
Well, you see, Mr. Baloyi, I was very keen from the beginning to hear what you have to say about this transfer. And originally, what I was interested in is what Mr. Maseko had testified about, because he, in effect, said, my transfer from GCIS to DPSA, was ultimately rushed so much that Minister Baloyi, who was not at the cabinet meeting, had to hear from me for the first time that I was his new DG, because on the day of the cabinet meeting, which was the 2nd of February, he says it came to his and Minister Chabane's attention that E-News or ENCA was running the story that he was being replaced by Mr. Manyi as CEO of GCIS. And he alerted Minister Chabane about this, and they realized that a decision about where he was going needed to be done immediately, because otherwise, if there is a delay about that, the impression out there to the public would be like he has been fired. Because if it simply says he has been replaced by Mr. Manyi and there's nothing about he has gone to another department. And then apparently Minister Chabane then approached the president and had a discussion with him, or whispered something to his ear while the meeting was on. And then before the end of the cabinet meeting, the announcement was made. So he then says, Minister Baloyi was not at that meeting of cabinet on that day. But now this whole thing had to be rushed. And when I phoned him, he was surprised, and he said he was not aware of the transfer, or something to that effect. So I wanted to know. That's why initially I wanted to hear your evidence. How did this come about that you are the minister of a department, you're getting a DG, you don't know? Is that something normal? Is that how it happened? Blah 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 blah. So when you say if there was an appointment or a transfer that happened by announcement and there was no memo, a cabinet memo and so on, it would be very strange. I'm just saying, part of what I found strange was that a minister, on Mr. Masego's version, a minister would have a DG imposed on him like that. What was so urgent about that? So I'm just giving you the background, because you hinted on this being strange if the cabinet would not have had any discussion, would not have made any decision, but just an announcement would have been made. So you can understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do understand, Chairperson, and that's why I'm saying if the due process was not followed, because a presidential minute is there. I got it from the commission. A presidential minute is signed and co-signed. What needs to be established is whether there was a cabinet memorandum. And what I'm getting now is that it's like there was no cabinet memorandum to that effect. It was just an announcement. Because it does happen. It happened a lot that due to commitments, I will not be in cabinet when appointments have to be done. But always there will be a minister who, on my behalf, will deal with that. So it never arose. I mean, if it was because of the agency, I think it was an extraordinarily urgent occurrence, not in keeping with
how things normally happen.
How things normally happen, because I will be duty bound sometimes to not be in cabinet, and then, but if I'm out of the country, there will be a minister acting.
Who would be acting?
And that minister who's acting is the one who's going to present the cabinet memorandum. If I'm in the country, but not in cabinet, there will be a minister who will do the same. So, honestly speaking, it's just that we need, these are some of the things, Chairperson, that raised my frustrations when I indicated to then say, this is a state process. And as a state process, that has a government. And it's not a new government, it's the same government. Now, if we have to have access to records, and there has to be a merry-go-round, I mean, really, we're not helpful to the public. And I think something needs to be established. If there is no cabinet memo
Yes,
recommending an appointment, and
Yeah.
there is an appointment,
yes.
is something that maybe we may need to search further. Like I indicated in my opening statement, that I approached my employer of the time to then say they may be in a position to facilitate. I mean, the records of DPSA, you will find these documents there. It will be simple to do that.
Well, Ms. Hofmeyer, you can take forward. I do know, as you know, that some documents that you have been given come from DPSA. The Commission's legal team and investigators were in touch with the DPSA, and certain documents were obtained. But Ms. Hofmeyer can deal with that much better.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Baloyi, if we can go to page 18 of Exhibit N in 4, that's page 18. I'd like to pick up on what you say there about what transpired at the Cabinet meeting on the 2nd of February. But before we go there, we have, as we've been speaking, Chair and Mr. Baloyi had a response from the Office of the Presidency. They have checked the minutes for us, and it is confirmed that Mr. Baloyi was not present on the 2nd of February.
Okay.
They very kindly come back to us under great urgency.
Yes.
We will ask for an affidavit
Yes,
confirming that. And just
Okay.
also in relation to Ms. Oliphant, they did confirm that she was present. So
Okay.
those were the two
Okay.
items from this morning's evidence we
Yes.
wanted to follow up on.
Okay.
But Mr. Baloyi, at paragraph F on page 18, you state there, "For me, everything was above board, and it was confirmed when the transfer memorandum served before Cabinet, as there was no issue raised about the transfer." Where did you obtain that information from?
I co-signed the presidential minute with the president. That comes after the cabinet meeting, and ought to come after the cabinet memorandum. That statement I wrote there is part of those that are then supposedly, I think the due process was followed. This is what, because you may not have a president's minute signed without the processes that would have come. If that was the case, so to answer your question, I'm getting this from them because it is my signature that is on the president's minute as co-signing the president's minute.
So did
But
you...
I'm sorry, do you have an independent recollection that there was a cabinet memorandum? Or are you saying you think that there was a cabinet memorandum because you can't think of how there can be a presidential minute signed without there being a cabinet memorandum on the matter?
Exactly, Chairperson, the latter part.
The latter, yes. So you don't have an independent recollection that you did see the memorandum?
I don't have.
don't
even
have,
even the president's minute, I got it from the commission.
Yes, okay.
And I then said,
Yes.
can we get the
The
cabinet memorandum? Because
Yes.
that cabinet memorandum
Yes.
will assist a lot.
Yes. And ordinarily, the kind of cabinet memorandum we are talking about here, if it does exist or did exist, would have been prepared by your department for you.
Exactly, Chairperson.
Yes, okay, but as things stand, you don't have an independent recollection that there was such a memorandum. You just think you think it probably was there because all the time whenever there's a presidential minute, there would have been a cabinet memorandum before.
There would have been concurrence by cabinet.
Yes.
And cabinet during my term has never given concurrence to a verbal announcement.
Yes, yes.
So
yes.
that's exactly what
Yes.
I mean, I can't base on what one official in GCIS indicated. It was that, no, I saw a cabinet memorandum that was signed. I can't base it, but honestly speaking, I'm basing this on the due process. So I can't imagine that something like that will happen, that cabinet takes a decision based on an announcement and on no submission of a cabinet memorandum. It's something that we need to actually, maybe Chairperson, to agree that the Commission continue to get the information, but that's where I get it from them. Or my former employer, because I was an employee by the time. That's why as you said, Chair, in your opening remarks, that I wrote quite a lot of things.
Yeah.
Some of them articulate to what normally should obtain.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
So I will also use my own
Contacts.
conducts formally to actually look at that, because the government I was working for is still there, it exists. And there is no way that it has to be left on my own to keep records. Because when ministers leave, you don't take a briefcase of documents, you leave them there. I'm convinced if something is like that, there was no cabinet memorandum, I would be so surprised. I would be so surprised, Chairperson. Actually, worryingly surprised as to how does cabinet concurs to a non-existing issue.
But remember, I think Ms. Hofmeyer told you earlier on that I think Mr. Masego said what happened was that there was no discussion of the issue of his transfer by cabinet. And there was no decision taken by cabinet. There was simply an announcement to the cabinet that Mr. Masego was being transferred from GCIS to DPSA, and Mr. Manyi was being transferred from Department of Labor to GCIS, or simply that Mr. Manyi would replace him. That's my recollection of what his evidence was. So on his version, and he was there, according to him, cabinet was simply told that this is what's going to happen. They were not required to make any decisions. So if those facts are correct, would you not therefore understand why there would be no cabinet memorandum?
Yeah, if those facts are correct, really, I'll then understand why no. But I'm not sure how it will then be possible for a president minute to be addressed. That's why, Chair, my submission, if it so pleases, my submission is that we do a lot more search on this to establish as to whether we may not come with something like that.
Yes.
It will be surprising if such a situation happened.
Would you remember whether officials within your department who may have helped to prepare such a memo, who they would have been, and whether maybe they might remember that, no, we definitely prepared a memorandum, or maybe they might also not know with the passage of time. Would you remember or who they may have been, or that's too difficult to say after so many years?
Yeah, too difficult after so many years, and I will then say, if now I approach my employer about that,
Yeah.
it has to be a formal thing. I won't do
Yes.
it behind
Yeah.
the door,
Okay.
the front doors.
Yes,
Just to look at, let's see as to whether this is what happened. Because if really that is what has happened, there was no cabinet decision, there was no submission in cabinet, there was an announcement. It will definitely have been too strange an issue to think about.
Yes.
Mr. Baloyi, can we go back to your co-signing of the presidential minute?
Yes.
Because your evidence, as I have it, is that you did so on the 3rd of February. Is that correct?
It's correct, madam.
So before you signed that, what inquiries did you make about what had happened at the previous day's cabinet meeting?
Ma'am, I think if we can agree that my proposal that we get more information on this matter will deal with that question.
Mr. Baloyi, you see, the only place that holds the records of cabinet is the presidency. And we have engaged the presidency on the records of cabinet. And I mentioned to you previously we'd obtained the affidavit of the Director General in the presidency, Dr. Lubisi. He has looked at the minutes of the 2nd of February. He's confirmed that there was no cabinet memorandum serving before cabinet. He's confirmed that there was no discussion reflected, and he's confirmed that there was no decision taken about the transfers of Mr. Manyi and Mr. Maseko. So that is where the evidence would lie, and those are investigations that the Commission has undertaken. My question to you was a different one. Before you signed on the 3rd of February, do you have a recollection of what you had before you, or what questions you asked before signing it?
But madam, let me put it clear that the department, the employing department will have records.
But not if there wasn't a cabinet memorandum that served before cabinet on the 2nd of February.
I'm not convinced that there was no cabinet memorandum. I want to be convinced that there was no cabinet memorandum.
But how would a record of DPSA convince you if the people who've looked at the minutes say it doesn't reflect there being a memorandum?
Well, people are people. I mean, I don't think, unless if we then say that in an inquiry like this, the evidence of a witness is not taken so serious to warrant that we actually look at that, because I'm saying as far as I'm concerned. But is it possible that we can actually look at that? Because then if we come back here and there was really no cabinet memorandum, there was no cabinet discussion, then on the basis of what was the transfer effected?
Am I right, Mr. Baloyi, to think that if in fact, after all the checking and the investigation that you think may still be done, if in fact after all that, you were to find that what Dr. Lubisi says in the affidavit, that there was no cabinet memorandum and there were no minutes, that there was no discussion or decision taken by cabinet about these two transfers of Mr. Maseko and Mr. Manyi. Am I right to think that that would shock you?
That will shock me, Chairperson.
That would shock you.
That will shock me.
It shouldn't be like that.
Come again?
It should not be like that.
It should not be like that. It should definitely not be like that.
Yes, okay. Well, I think it is open to the Commission to reflect on what else it can still do to go beyond what we have. I am not sure, but I don't want you to get the impression that we are saying nothing further can be done. It's possible that we can apply our minds and do further, but on the face of it, and thinking that, bearing in mind that this is quite a senior official, the Director General in the Presidency, deposing to an affidavit to submit to a commission such as this, having been asked to check, one would think that he would have taken trouble to check properly. So, but I'm not saying that nothing further can be done to try and check. So, certainly, we can reflect and take it from there. And from your side, you might also have suggestions, or having been minister, you might have Minister of DPSA, having dealt with these things, you might have ideas of what else could be done. We are not closing the door. Yeah. Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you. Mr. Baloyi, I understand your evidence to be that former President Zuma did not consult you before the transfer of Mr. Maseko and Mr. Mani took place. Is that correct?
It's correct, Madam.
Thank you. And if the evidence, as the chair has indicated, establishes that there was no cabinet memorandum that served before cabinet about those transfers on the 2nd of February, and no decision of cabinet in relation to that, how then would the president have known whether Mr. Maseko's consent to the transfer had been obtained?
The letter that was written on consent by Minister Chabane was written addressed to me.
Yes.
But then the issue is, if the question is, how would, if there has been no cabinet, how will the president have known? I think these are things that what we are going to establish with the further work that has to be done here will actually inform that. Because the question will not only be how he will know, how he will have known, but then the issue will be how he will have got his signature on the president's minute.
Yes, he might have put his signature there without knowing whether Mr. Maseko had consented or not. Isn't that a possibility?
I take it as the executive authority of the national executive, he knew what had to happen. So, and again, I also co-signed that a president minute. So I think it's something that when we look at why his signature there, what would have informed, is the same question that then say, what would have informed my signature to be there? And I think it is through what we're going to establish when we do further research on the matter.
Is it possible that you could have co-signed the presidential minute even though there was no cabinet memorandum, simply because on what you have told me to have been your role in this transfer, simply because, one, you knew that a decision had been taken that Mr. Maseko should leave GCIS, Minister Chabane had told you as much. 2, you knew that you were asked to advise on managing the exit. 3, you had, on your version, you had had a discussion with Mr. Masego, and verbally he had consented to a transfer. And 4, you may have been told that, look, we've got the concurrence of Minister Chabane, we've got the consent of the Director General, Mr. Masego, we have got your consent as Minister of DPSA if you need to give consent. The President has no problem with the transfer, to say the least. He has no problem. Now, E-News has got this, is running the story, and let's sign, and the paperwork will be fixed later.
No, Chairperson, if there was such a move to then say, let's sign paperwork, will be fixed later, we'll be tracing that indeed paperwork was done. But for me, Chairperson, it's just unthinkable that such a thing can happen.
Yes, but my question is a different one. It is whether what I've just tabulated now, if this was told to you, or being aware of these things, whether that would have persuaded you to say, okay, even if the paperwork is not there, because we know this to be the position, nobody's objecting to this thing. And we don't want the impression to be created out there that Mr. Masego has been fired. I will sign. I'm asking whether knowing all of those things may have been enough to persuade you to co-sign the presidential minute, even though the paperwork wasn't there.
No, Chairperson. What I would have done was to expedite. But make sure that the due process is followed. That's why I responded earlier to say, I will be shocked if there is no cabinet memorandum to that effect.
So, but in this case, when you say you would have wanted to make sure that due process was followed, do you include in terms of due process cabinet discussing the issue and making a decision?
Yes, Chairperson.
Are you saying therefore you would have been opposed to co-signing of the presidential minute if there had been no due process, including a discussion of the transfer and decision by cabinet?
Exactly, Chairperson, because the signing of a presidential minute is the last step, is the approval of the action. But before that, cabinet concurrence has to be in place. And that is the process, that's the due process that I will insist that it happens. That's why I'm saying I'll really be shocked if we're sitting in a situation where the appointment, the transfer is effected, but the transfer is not facilitated. Because that's exactly what it will mean.
What if your understanding, I'm not saying it was so, but what if your understanding was that the president was happy that the presidential minute be signed and paperwork would be dealt with later because there was some urgency as he saw it? Would you still have been opposed to signing without the paperwork?
I'll be disappointed with myself, Chairperson, if that was the case, because I'm not the type of person who, because somebody decides this has to be done, even if it's not correct, it must be done. It's quite a lot of things that
You don't operate like that.
I don't operate like that. That's why I'm saying I will not only be shocked about what cabinet would have done, I will also be shocked by my own actions. So that's the position, Chairperson. For me, that's why if I were to say, I mean, in our discussion with Minister Chabane, that's what I indicated there. When I then say transfer to another, or then saying, are you sure that does I say, no, that is what I need to do. And I started in the beginning, right on the day. The day it was announced that I was to be a minister, even before I was sworn in. Immediately after the adjournment of Parliament, where it was announced, one minister approached me to then say, oh, now it's you there, we're going to deal with these issues. And I then said, because we have, as a portfolio committee, been opposed to this arbitrary exit of heads of department. That was my conviction. So I will not only be shocked and disappointed by that by the decision for the transfer to have been effected without a CAB memo. I will also be disappointed by myself having appended my signature on the president's minute. Because for me, it's not who says what, but for me is what is right.
And you think it would have been wrong to have a transfer without that due process and without cabinet discussing and making a decision on it?
It would have been wrong. I mean, even the department would have then said, but where is the due process? I mean, what really, it will be something very wrong.
Yes, okay.
Chair, I note that we've just passed 4 o'clock.
Yes.
I don't have a great deal more, but there are a few aspects just to conclude on Mr. Maseko's transfer and then a few on Mr. Money, but we've traversed a lot of what happened on the 2nd of February, so that won't be long.
No,
Would it be possible to sit a bit later?
Yeah, we can continue because I would like us to finish with
Indeed.
him. Because tomorrow I think I'm starting early.
Certainly.
Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Is it fine if we continue a bit?
I'm available, Chairperson.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baloyi. I'd like to take you to the affidavit that we received from the presidency. You'll find it in Exhibit NN5, and it starts at page 319. 319.
319,
Right
okay.
at the end of that file.
Did you say 319?
Indeed, Chair.
Yes, ma'am, I'm there.
Thank you. So at 319 is the first page of the affidavit, and it's an affidavit deposed to by Dr. Lubisi, who is currently the Director General in the Presidency and who is also the Secretary of Cabinet. Mr. Baloyi, I'd like you to have the benefit of what he says about his personal studying of the minutes of the 2nd of February, because I want to understand from you what possible further investigations could be done in the light of what is contained here.
Okay.
So if I can just take you through the affidavit, if you go over the page to page 320, you'll see there that Dr. Lubisi talks about, itemizes there what specific requests were made by the Commission in relation to the 2 February 2011 Cabinet minutes. And he records there that the Commission responded. This was to a request for particularity as to what we were looking for in the minutes. And he says the Commission responded seeking those parts of the 2 February 2011 minutes that reflected, and then there are 4 items there at 5.1 to 5.4. The Commission requested any and all noting by Cabinet of the decision to transfer Mr. Maseko from GCIS to the DPSA, any and all noting by Cabinet of the decision to transfer Mr. Mani to GCIS, any and all decisions of Cabinet relating to the transfers of Mr. Mani and Mr. Maseko, and any recordal of any memoranda that were placed before Cabinet at its meeting of 2 February 2011 in relation to the transfer of Mr. Mani and Mr. Maseko. If you go over the page, you'll find what Mr. Lubisi says after he personally studied the minutes, and you'll find that at paragraph 9. Dr. Lubisi there says, I have personally studied the minutes of the Cabinet meeting of 2 February 2011 and can confirm that the minutes do not record any Cabinet memorandum dealing with the transfers of Mr. Maseko and Mr. Mani, or indeed transfers of the Directors General of GCIS, DPSA, or Labour, having served before Cabinet at the meeting of 2 February 2011. He says, I can also confirm that the minutes do not reflect any discussion of or decision taken in relation to these transfers. So, Mr. Baloyi, what other possible investigations could be done other than asking the Secretary of Cabinet to look at those minutes and tell us what they contain?
Maybe I could just say before Mr. Baloyi responds, as I was reading through this affidavit while she was also looking, I noted that for the best part, the Director General and the Presidency seemed to talk about other officials having perused the minutes. But when I came to the last paragraph, paragraph 9, where he says he personally studied the minutes, then I thought, okay, well, if he personally studied, that makes a big difference. I thought he was giving us an affidavit based on what other people's observations. I thought he had not studied the minutes himself. I thought I must just give you what I was thinking to, what I was looking for to say, but it's not enough if he just tells us that officials in his office have looked at the documents. This is what they've told him. But then I came to this paragraph where he says he personally studied the minutes. But you may respond. I think the import of the question is what were you thinking of? What do you have in mind of that could go beyond this to try and establish whether indeed what he is saying here is true?
Chair, what I had in mind, and is what I have in mind, still making a submission, is that the receiving department, which is
your department,
which is DPSA, definitely should be having records in this regard, because even the presidential minute, when it has to be done, is initiated in the department, and the minister signs and then refers that to the presidency. So I would be surprised and to have these things in. That's why I'm saying, suppose what Dr. Lubisi has indicated here, that's the final position, and DPSA has no record about that. That's where I've indicated what my position will be, that of serious disappointment. I can't imagine what would have happened to actually get to a situation like this.
I think I do get the sense, Mr. Baloyi, that really when you look at the situation of such a transfer happening without discussion of Cabinet, the paperwork being before Cabinet and the decision being taken by Cabinet, you really can't imagine how that could happen.
I can't imagine, Chairperson.
Yes.
I can't imagine how that can happen. It will be That's why I'm saying I'll be so disappointed about the process and also about my own signature in that piece of paper. Because really the requirement is there has to be a cabinet memorandum.
Well, you see, in the end, after hearing everybody, including what the former president has to say, although he has already started giving evidence and has given his version in regard to this transfer, in the end, being the person who must make decisions and findings, I have to ask myself various questions. Now, even with this ENCA with the ENCA or E-News having got wind of the news that Mr. Masego was to be replaced by Mr. Manyi, I don't know whether that would be a sufficient justification for things not to be dealt with in the normal course. Why couldn't a media statement be issued which would indicate something without having to rush anything? I'm not sure that the mere fact that a news channel got wind of part of the news would be enough. But Mr. Masego's evidence included this, Mr. Baloyi, which you may have picked up from his statements and his transcript. He says he was told by Minister Chabane. He was called by Minister Chabane, who said to him that he had received a call from the former president while the former president was out of the country, who said that he needed to, in effect, get Mr. Masego out of GCIS. I think he put it as, he put it on the basis that Mr. Masego had to be removed or fired from GCIS or transferred or put somewhere, but that that is the former president, according to Mr. Masego, relaying what Minister Chabane relayed to him. The former president had said that by the time he arrived back in the country, Mr. Masego should no longer be in GCIS. Now, the information that, that's my recollection, I hope I'm right, yeah. I think Ms. Hofmeyer nods, so I think that's her recollection too. So Mr. Masego said, Minister Chabane said, you know, the president said by the time he arrives back, he mustn't be in GCIS. But that he went on to say to him, because I know you are a good civil servant or public servant, I won't throw you into the street. I'll try and find a place for you. That's what he said. And I think the information the commission has suggests that the president arrived back into the country. He was out of the country on some state business. I think he had gone to a BRICS meeting, if I'm not mistaken, and then to an AU meeting, if I'm not mistaken. When he arrived back on the 1st of February. I think that's my recollection. I don't know if it's 31st, but
Here it was on the 1st,
On the
actually,
1st,
so it's the
yes.
Tuesday of the week
Yes,
before the cabinet
before the
meeting
meeting,
on
yes.
the 2nd.
so he arrived on the 1st. The cabinet meeting was to be on the 2nd. So obviously arrived while Mr. Masego was still at GCIS. And then we have been told what happened on the 2nd. So a question that one cannot avoid is to say, if what Mr. Masego says he was told by Mr. Chabane is true, then maybe the e-news factor added to some agency that was there anyway. I'm not sure, but that's the background that Mr. Masego gave. Is that something that you heard of at any stage while you were still minister? Or is that something you had for the first time after Mr. Masego had gone public about?
Yeah, I heard about it after Mr. Masego had said something about this. And I agree with you, Chairperson, that in the procedure that obtains, which I was presiding over as in DPSA, there will be the ENCA announcement will not have actually necessitated a departure from the normal practice, because a statement could easily be issued to clarify that, and then we deal with the issues accordingly. So that's why I'm saying if the commission would, I know, because from the presidency we already have an affidavit, I can see that it might be difficult to go the route of trying to establish, but I'll submit that my request be accepted. I want to satisfy myself,
Yes.
Chairperson,
Yes.
that something amiss went on in our judgment or something. It's a I would
Yeah.
be surprised.
You just can't understand how you do anything like this
Just-
without process.
Yeah,
due
I just
process.
can't understand.
Well, if you said that your department, one would expect it to have documents including such a memorandum if it does exist, is that right?
Yes, Chairperson, I said that.
Yes. Do you think it might help if arrangements were to be made with the Director General of the Department of Public Service and Administration, maybe for you in the company of maybe an investigator or a member of the legal team from the commission to be allowed to go to the department and see whether that visit can help in any way in terms of trying to look where there could be information. Do you think that is something that can help, or is it something that you'd like to do on your own?
We can combine both, 80%.
Yeah. But that is one of the things you are thinking of.
Yes.
Yeah, to try and establish really
Try and
whether
establish, because
there
really
was-
I can't establish as to, I mean, I can't
imagine that
imagine how things like those
could have happened. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Chair,
Ms. Hoffman.
there have been engagements with DPSA,
Yes.
precisely in relation to any records they had on this topic.
Yes.
And amongst the records we did receive is
Yes.
a document entitled an explanatory memorandum, and I would like to take Mr. Baloyi there in fairness.
Yes.
Mr. Baloyi, it's in Exhibit NN5, and it's at page 42, 42. Chair, while Mr. Baloyi is finding that page, NN5, page 42, certainly it will be our submission that whatever might exist in the records of DPSA, unless there is a basis to go behind what Dr. Labisi has said on affidavit, it did not find its way to Cabinet. The records of that meeting indicate no Cabinet memorandum before, no discussion of, and no decision on. But there is this document. We have traversed both Department of Labour, DPSA, and GCIS for all possible documents related to these transfers. And Mr. Baloyi will tell us afterwards if he thinks there's still further investigations that need to take place. But Mr. Baloyi,
Have you found that document, Mr. Baloyi?
Yes, Chairperson, I found
Yes.
it.
Now, that is a document entitled Explanatory Memorandum. Before we go there, Mr. Baloyi, the usual process for Cabinet memoranda being placed before Cabinet, we understood from Mr. Maseko there's a whole process involved. It's prepared, it then goes to the relevant subcommittee, and then it serves before Cabinet at the particular meeting. Are you aware of that process?
Chair, if first I can talk to this document. It's one of the documents that were given to me
Yes.
on Wednesday.
Yes. Have you had a chance to, I assume you had. did you have a
Clearly,
chance to
I
read
had
it?
no chance to actually look at this. And it comes in as an...
Of course, if you got it on Wednesday last week, you should have read it. You did have a chance. You might not have read it, but you did have a chance.
Chairperson, it was sent to me electronically. And I actually read it on
On the screen.
on Thursday, and I sent a message to the Commission through an email
Yes.
requesting for some more document
Yes.
about that.
Yes.
And of course, this having not been introduced exactly as to what it's all about.
Yes.
One didn't include it there, but it's part of the things that if I'm given a chance, we could actually look at these things. And having requested, Chairperson, to have a document assisting me to work on this thing, it's really a problem to look at that. So I'm hearing that this document was obtained in DPSA, but there was it was never referred to Cabinet.
Well, maybe let's take it step by step. I think Ms. Hofmeyer wants to ask you some questions.
Okay.
And maybe, Ms. Hofmeyer, I know there is an affidavit by the DG of DPSA somewhere. Maybe we should start there, because I don't know whether in that affidavit he may be saying the documents he is sending you are all the documents that have something to do with the transfer or not. But you would be more familiar with that.
Indeed, Chair. I'll go there in a moment, if I may.
Yes, okay.
Whether this is everything or not is not pertinent for my present questions. My present questions are just dealing with this document.
Yes.
So if we could focus on 42. There's a signature on that page. Is that your signature, Mr. Baloyi?
Yes, madam.
And do you recall this document?
Come again?
Do you remember this document?
I saw it as it came,
Yes.
as you sent, as I got it on. But I don't remember like to then say verbatim, this is what we're discussing when, stuff like that.
Well, do you remember drafting this memorandum?
The drafting of documents in a government department is done by officials and referred to ministers.
Thank you.
And a document like this coming as one page definitely should be part of a submission or a file I referred to earlier on, that some of these documents that were supposed to comment on, the information is readily available in the government department. So to really then single out this document, to then say 10, 11 years ago, this is the document you signed, do you remember it? Really, it's a problem.
No, I fully understand that, and I'm grateful for your evidence that drafting takes place by officials. May I then just ask, as you sit here today, do you remember receiving this document around the time of the transfers? And feel free to say you don't remember. I just want to be clear on what your recollection is.
In other words, does it ring a bell to say, no, I remember this document?
It rings a bell, Chairperson, and my signature is there.
Yes,
But it's
yes.
part of what?
Yes.
That is the issue.
What would that signature, what would your signature there on the document signify? When you signed it, what would it have signified? Approval of the document? Would it have signified that you have had sight of the document? Or what would it signify?
Normally, signatures come at the bottom of a document.
Yes.
Mean that the totality of the document
Yes, yes.
you concur with, and then here my signature comes on the side of
Yeah,
paragraph
that's
2.
what I don't understand. Yeah.
That I don't understand as to what was.
Yes.
Maybe I was then saying, okay, I note that they say the President's minute proposes the transfer of Mr. T.J. Maseko, the Director General, but then all what it means the paragraph 2, it then clarifies what I said earlier on, to say the President's minute was drafted, according to paragraph 2, was drafted at the Presidency, proposing the transfer of Mr. Maseko to DPSA. And then talking about the post in DPSA is vacant, and then all that like that. So my signature there is on the side. It could mean that this is an explanatory memorandum to which the cabinet, the President's minute was attached. It could be that it rings up. When I read it like that, it could mean that is exactly.
Mr. Baloyi, you might be happy to learn that when I read this, I had a similar view about it, that it may have been an explanatory memo attached to the presidential minute.
Yes.
Because it reads as though it talks about the presidential minute, it talks about what it proposes, but what I'm really interested in today is whether this is a cabinet memorandum.
No, this is not a cabinet memorandum. And I've indicated that I have not applied my mind fully on this document. It comes in as a loose piece of paper. For sure, in the file in DPSA, this document is not standing alone idly there. It's a document that is attached to some other documents that will be key for us considering that. Because when you look at paragraph 2, which is what I'm actually picking up, is that it talks about the President's minute having been drafted. So, and then calling for DPSA to then work on it.
What I'd like to follow up on, though, is one other point in this memorandum at paragraph 3, Because we've been trying to locate it in time. I should be fair and say the documents we've received from both DPSA and Department of Labour are in a state of disarray. Certainly maybe at your time, Mr. Baloyi, things were kept in an orderly fashion, but we haven't been fortunate enough to find that in our investigations. But nonetheless, at paragraph 3, you'll see there it's recorded, the responsible executive authority for GCIS, the Minister of Performance Monitoring, Evaluation and Administration in the Presidency, concurs with the proposed transfer of Mr. Maseko. And then it says, see here with a copy of his letter to the Minister for Public Service and Administration in this regard. Do you see that?
I see it.
And you'll recall that previously we looked at a letter from Mr. Chabane addressed to you,
Yes.
dated the 2nd of February 2011. Do you accept that this memorandum, therefore, must have been produced after receipt of that letter from Minister Chabane on the 2nd of February?
I mean, from what the document is saying,
Indeed.
we can conclude that.
Indeed, I think that's fair.
Well, there is something else in this memorandum that is interesting. If you look at the last sentence of paragraph 4, it says the proposed transfer was discussed with Mr. Maseko and he is in agreement. You remember, you and I had a discussion and I was saying that if such if a cabinet memorandum exists or existed and it said Mr. Maseko had consented to the transfer, that might not be helpful enough. Where it might be helpful is if it indicates that you had a discussion with him, because you say there was a discussion, you had a discussion with him. He says there was no discussion between the two of you about his transfer before the announcement to cabinet. You remember that? You remember that discussion between the two of us?
I remember, Chairperson.
This last sentence there, do you know whether that's a sentence that you might have had something to do with? Or you don't remember?
I don't remember. The paragraph 4, I said the proposed effective date of the transfer is the date following the...
No, it's the last sentence that I'm looking at.
Yeah, the last sentence.
Yes, you don't remember.
Is the date? No, I don't remember.
Yes. Okay, all right. Let me just ask something else before I forget. Ms. Hofmeyer referred you to the letter from Minister Chabane to you that we looked at earlier.
Yes.
And at the beginning of that letter, Mr. Chabane says he concurs to the transfer, if I recall correctly. What page is it again?
It's the next
Maybe.
page, Chair. Yes, next page, 43.
Yes, yes. He says, I concur, subject to the President's approval, with the transfer of Mr. T.J. Maseko. You know, there is this question of who initiated the transfer, where did the idea come from? One way of looking at I concur may be that somebody else has made a suggestion or proposal and you then concur, okay? And I'm wondering whether there is any significance to be attached to him saying that. Is there any, have you got any comment?
To
him saying, I concur.
I concur.
He's writing to you.
Yes.
He says, I concur. And I'm saying one interpretation might be as if you had suggested something and he's concurring to it.
Exactly, Chairperson. I suggested to him the transfer of Mr. Maseko in the meeting I referred to. He approached me about exit management, and I introduced two proposals to him, two options, redetermination and transfer. And I suggested the best one is that of transfer. And we agreed that we need to approach him, both of us, individually. If he gives consent, then we should process the matter further. But of course, that will still be subject to concurrence by cabinet and approval by the president.
Now, you had a discussion with Minister Chabane about this transfer, and you have already said that he made it clear that a decision had been taken that Mr. Masego should in effect leave GCIS. Is that how he put it? I'm not saying word for word, but did he put it in that way, that a decision had been taken? Is that how he put it?
That's how he put it, Chairperson. And that's why even in my affidavit I indicated that I then said, when I said exit management, I said in a situation where the initiator is not the DG, we need to get the DG consent, because the exit for him was exit from GCIS, but the issue of transfer came with me. The issue of redetermination came with me.
You see, it doesn't strike me as a normal way of speaking if I have made the decision and I'm asking you for advice, and I say a decision has been taken, instead of saying, you know, because you were his colleague and he was asking for advice from you on the management of the exit. Doesn't strike me as normal, a normal way of speaking for me to say a decision has been taken, instead of me saying, you know, I've taken a decision that I can't work with Mr. Masego anymore. He needs to leave. Can you help me with how to manage his departure? Have you got any comment on what I'm saying in terms of how it came across to you? Did you have the same feeling as I do, that I would expect you to say to me as your colleague, if you want advice, say, I can't continue working with my DG anymore. I've made the decision that he needs to go, but I need your advice. In other words, I would disclose that I'm the one who has made the decision. Have you got anything you are able to say about what you thought of this way of putting things to you on his part?
Chair, I thank you very much. I consider that in the context of a reported speech, where it may not be ordinary, straightforward communication language, but it's not unheard of in reported situations that a person may say a decision has been taken, even referring to that decision having been taken by that person. That was my understanding, Chairperson. It may differ with the general norm in terms of understanding communications, but in a reported form, I took it like that. That's why in my statement, I said I understood what it means. But of course, I understood that he cannot take a decision like that, even if it's him, without consulting his principal, because the responsibility to transfer or the authority first with the president. So,
Yes.
so him working in that establishment, it was then said the presidency has taken a decision. And the presidency as an establishment has got a minister in the president, or ministers in the president, and then the president. So that's my understanding. And it didn't come to me. My only interest, Chairperson, was who initiated that.
Yes.
And it was clear that it was not initiated by Maseko.
Yes, yes.
And having not been initiated by Maseko, that's when then it came to me that we need
Yes.
to manage it in a particular way.
Yes. So, so your understanding was that in saying a decision has been taken, he was not necessarily excluding himself
Exactly, Chairperson.
from the decision.
Exactly, Chairperson.
But your understanding was that what he meant was that the president had been consulted, because your understanding was that such a decision can't be finalized without the president. That was your understanding.
That was my understanding, Chairperson.
Yes.
That was my understanding, because I mean, even when in the point Madam referred to earlier on referral of documents for appointment purposes,
Yes,
even
yes.
when ministers will shortlist and come with three possible candidates, before referring that to the Minister of Public Service and Administration, they will have to touch base with the authority that is the president, to then say, then it means any of these candidates are employable. Then they come to me, then we deal with the necessary checks in terms of the requirements.
Yes.
So the move taken is always taken in consultation.
Yes. Okay.
Chair, if I may, because I think this is quite an important part of Mr. Baloyi's evidence, I took very careful note, Mr. Baloyi, when the chairperson asked you earlier to take your mind back and actually try and tell us what was said in the conversation between you and Minister Chabane. As I wrote it down, you said that Minister Chabane had said to you, "I have been informed there is a decision that Mr. Maseko must leave." Do you remember recounting that earlier?
I think that Minister Chabane said, I have been informed.
Yes. When the chair asked you, take yourself back to that conversation, and you were answering the chair's question, when you gave what Mr. Chabane said, as I wrote it down at the time, you said, Minister Chabane said, "I have been informed there is a decision that Mr. Maseko must leave."
No. That really, if that is what I said, what I said is that I was informed by the minister that a decision has been taken, not that the minister was informed.
I understand. Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Baloyi, if we may then go
So
briefly.
maybe just to finalize an aspect. So going back to initiating, once you knew that Mr. Maseko had not initiated the transfer or his move, departure from GCIS, on your understanding, was there only one other person who could initiate that, namely Minister Chabane, or could it have been initiated by anybody else? Leaving you aside, because you said that in certain circumstances you could as well, but I think you are not including yourself here.
Yes, Chairperson, exactly like I said, the minister could have initiated that, or the DG could have initiated that. That's exactly, if you
Yes.
say, could there be any other person? The answer is yes. The minister could initiate the transfer.
Okay.
or the exit, if we,
Yeah,
we
the
put
exit,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, if we put it.
Because initially it was just the exit.
It was just an
The
exit.
idea of a transfer came,
The transfer came with me.
yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Baloyi, I'd now like to move to Mr. Manyi very briefly,
okay.
both his dismissal and his transfer. The evidence before the Commission of Mr. Manyi and some of the documents we've been able to source indicates that Mr. Manyi engaged you very shortly after his position was terminated by former Minister Mdladlana. Does that accord with your recollection?
In the documents I received on Wednesday, there is reference to written exchange of communications between me and him. After Minister Oliphant requested my intervention. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. There was also amongst the documents sent to you what appears to be every alternate page of a type of memorandum that you may have written at the time. I'd like to take you to it so you can assist us with it. It's in Exhibit NN5, and it's at page 208.
I'm there.
Thank you. Mr. Baloyi, this is a document that appears to comprise at least here 3 pages. It runs from 208 to 210. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
It does seem to indicate at page 210 that you had some involvement in this document. Do you recall this document?
Yes, although it shares my name and it's not signed, but the content sounds familiar to me.
Okay. As I understand the content, in paragraph 1.1 on page 208, it records a request for intervention that had been received. Can you tell us what you recollect about that request for intervention?
I was refreshed to this issue when I received this document on Wednesday. And clearly approached in that fashion would be, it would be in writing. And clearly these are some of the documents that had I received them earlier, I would have researched more in terms of what is it that is in there. But having come on Wednesday, honestly speaking, it's I didn't do a lot in terms of establishing what's going on here.
As you sit here today, do you have any memory of receiving a request from the Office of the President of the Republic of South Africa to intervene in the matter involving Mr. Manyi's dismissal?
I'm not challenging this, what is contained in the document. The issues I'm raising is that received in time, I would have done further research to establish this matter.
And what would that research have involved?
You know, when I deal with these issues, I establish, because these things happened a long time ago. It involves thinking about it. It involves trying to engage with some of the people I was working with, just to try to have that recollection.
And you haven't
and it also involves something that I've indicated. It's also involved, like I said, I was not doing these things at a personal level. That's why I wrote to principals of my employment all the time assist me to get to this thing. Because surely, if I was requested to intervene and it's in writing, it should be there in the records. And to expect me to run around, look for this document, where will I find it?
Indeed. Chair, this is the appropriate point. I don't suggest we go there, but you asked earlier about the affidavit from the Director General of DPSA.
Oh, yes, yes.
Because this is amongst the documents that we obtained from DPSA.
Yes.
Mr. Baloyi, just to satisfy you in relation to any further investigations that you may wish to make.
Yeah.
What this document, as contained here, is the only version of it that we have managed to obtain from DPSA. They provided us with a full file of everything they had relating to Mr. Manyi's dismissal. That's set out in an affidavit that appears at page 162. And so certainly the Commission's efforts suggest that there are no further documents. But I understand your evidence to be you don't dispute that you may have received such a request.
Exactly. But I may not go into details
No,
as to whether
certainly.
it came telephonically or it came in writing.
Understood. You indicate over the page, in that memo at page 209, that you'd looked into the question of Mr. Manyi's dismissal and that you had made some recommendations to Minister Oliphant. You'll see that at 4.5. Mr. Baloyi, were you present for the evidence of Ms. Oliphant today?
Come again?
Were you present when
Yes,
Ms. Oliphant
yes,
was
I was
testifying?
present, yes.
Then you would have seen that I took her to a letter
Yeah.
that appears to have been written by you to her on
Yeah.
the 29th of November,
Yes.
2010. Do you recall sending that letter to her?
Yeah, I saw that letter also. I also received it on Wednesday. That's my signature. No doubt about it, is my letter.
Thank you. And you gave her 4 pieces of advice, if you'll recall in that letter. You'll find it at page 217.
Yes.
We went through it earlier. I won't take a lot of time with it, but I do want to just get your comment on Ms. Oliphant's evidence. You'll see at page 217, you advised her of 4 things.
Yes.
You advised her under 3A to withdraw the former minister's letter, which terminated the DG's services. You advised her to extend the DG's probation for another 4 months. C, to place him on 2-week special leave to allow space to find a suitable solution. And D, during this 2-week period, to decide whether or not to pursue the misconduct charges against the DG. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Can you confirm that's the advice you gave at the time?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Oliphant's evidence is that she didn't ever actually consider whether to pursue the misconduct charges. Did you hear her give that testimony?
I heard that, and of course it is on the same NN5, page 211, a handwritten note of a discussion between the 2 of us.
Will, help us with that. Is 211, Chair, if you'll go to Exhibit NN5, page 211, is that a note you took?
No. This was written by officials in the department, reporting about a meeting we had and informing of the decision. It was my advice was exactly as indicated there.
Yes.
And it was an advice. The decision was to be taken by the minister.
Yes, and so are you, when you look at page, the note that appears at 211, is that a note of a meeting you held with Minister Oliphant?
The contents reflected there,
Yes.
according to my recollection, is the content of our discussion.
Right, because what is reflected there at the handwritten note 1.2 is that disciplinary action against Mr. Manyi will not be pursued. Do you see that?
I see that.
Is that your recollection of what Ms. Oliphant communicated to you?
Yes.
Because Ms. Oliphant's evidence today before the Commission was that she didn't make a decision on the charges and whether to pursue them because she'd never seen them. She didn't know what they were.
Well, I heard that, Madam. I heard her say that, but we'll recall that the charges were dropped at the hearing. I'm sure there's one document that talks to that. When one official said, no, let's not continue with the hearing, because in any case, the probation period is coming to the end. But then the advice I got, I think there's another document, I think comes from DPSA. The advice we got from the legal team, which I agreed with, is that that decision does not necessarily say the charges were withdrawn. Hence my letter.
Indeed. So your understanding was a decision still had to be taken whether to pursue those charges. Is that right?
If it was in the interest of the ministry.
Indeed. And your evidence is that it was communicated to you by Ms. Oliphant that she was not going to pursue charges. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If she hadn't communicated that to you, would you have been concerned about the transfer of Mr. Manyi on the 2nd of February when that question was still left open?
In running a professional public service, if you have allegations towards somebody, you run the allegation to the end.
Indeed.
It's not an allegation is not enough to suggest that a person is guilty of what you suggest. You have to put a person through a process. So in this case, you have a situation where, in this case, it's like somebody indicate both to the left and to the right. Firstly, to say that we have cases of misconduct preferred against you. And then at some stage then say no, but then we are taking a decision no longer to proceed because the probation period has come to the end. It's really problematic.
Indeed. If I can then move fairly swiftly to Mr. Manyi's transfer. You dealt with it fairly briefly in your statement. I fully understand your difficulty with remembering back so many years and not having all that many documents available to you. But Mr. Baloyi, what you have learned today in the course of the questions is what is contained in Dr. Lebisi's affidavit, that there was no cabinet memorandum in relation to either of these transfers. There was no decision taken by cabinet on the 2nd of February, and there was no discussion by cabinet at that meeting. If those are the facts, Mr. Baloyi, would you accept that the transfer of Mr. Manyi also did not follow regular process?
The shock that I indicated, I will express serious shock, will apply to both cases because the procedure is the same. There is no procedure for one person which does not apply to the other person.
Indeed. And then, Mr. Baloyi, I'd like your comment on the following. Do you accept that state capture can occur within a society by removing people from positions who aren't willing to do the work of the captors? Is that something that you have given consideration to?
It's a hypothetical case.
It is, and I'm not asking, I will ask in due course whether you think that occurred here, based on what you know today, but I'm saying hypothetically, what is your understanding of state capture?
Well, my understanding of state capture is a situation where the organs of state, we're talking about organs of state as to the role of the separation of powers coming to the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, and also structures of government. don't avoid taking certain decisions or take certain decisions clearly informed by the intention to amass wealth. I mean, that's a general definition I can give.
And it's Mr. Maseko's evidence before this commission that he was removed from the position of GCIS because he was unwilling to direct certain spend within GCIS to the New Age newspaper, of which the owners were the Guptas. And I think the evidence today, and I'd like your comment on this, has established that if the facts deposed to by Mr. Lubisi are correct, both the transfer of Mr. Maseko to DPSA and the transfer of Mr. Mani into GCIS were irregular. Do you accept that?
Well, I can't second guess the decision of executive authorities. Never in my involvement was the issue of the Guptas or any other thing raised with me when I interacted with all those. So I can't then say the move by Minister Chabane, the move by the President was informed by anything. Mine was to assist the process as far as procedure is concerned. And even if it will be established that the documents that we don't have now, even if it will be established that they are not there, it will not for me be because of anything that has to do with state capture. There hasn't been never any person who mentioned my name as having been suspected of involvement in either benefiting or promoting these triple challenges of state capture, corruption, and fraud as a manifestation of corruption. So I was dealing with this as a process of transferring officials at the instance or at the request of the ministers I provided support to.
Chair, just one follow-up question, if I may, before our questions are concluded.
Yes.
Mr. Baloyi, do you accept, given what your understanding of state capture is, though, that irregular removals of persons and irregular transfers of persons may be a way in which it is facilitated?
But firstly, we need to prove that there has been irregular transfers. It's not in general terms. So the issues, and we have to prove, or to establish beyond reasonable doubt that in fact this is irregular transfers. And not errors in administration. So
yes.
I think dealing with applying hypothetical questions on particular issues may not be very helpful.
Mr. Baloyi, I wanted to give you an opportunity to make comment on that, because we will make submissions in due course about how to put all of these events together. For the record, no part of the Commission's processes require things to be established beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't have to establish things beyond a reasonable doubt in this Commission. We need to probe, and it is my comment to you for your comment that in the course of today we have established that the transfers of Mr. Mani and Mr. Maseko were irregular. Do you have a comment on that?
I have requested that we look at certain documents that may lead us to come to even inform a decision on the balance of probabilities, because the issue is I raised those things. I have expressed my surprise on what appeared to have been, and I have submitted that we look at these things. And had I received this document earlier, I would have definitely, within my means, tried to establish what's going on. So to then say, based on what we have conclusively, we can then say we have sufficient grounds to decide on the balance of probabilities that these things are there. Well, I can't say the commission should not reach that stage, but the commission should understand that it's reaching that stage, I having raised a request.
Thank you. Those are our
Those
questions.
are the questions,
Chair.
okay, thank you. Mr. Baloyi, I don't remember that you gave a version with regard to Mr. Masego's evidence that he called you after his transfer had been announced to Cabinet. He called you, I don't know whether he said the same day or the following day, but I think he said that was before he went to start or assume his duties at DPSA. Do you remember receiving a call from him where he was telling you that he was your new DG at all?
Chair, I don't remember that. And in my earlier evidence, I indicated that to the extent of my recollection, I initiated the transfer.
So you have no recollection of the call. You are not saying it did not happen, but you say you have no recollection of receiving a call from him where he said that he told you that he was your new DG.
I have no recollection of that, Chairperson.
Yes, and you would say, in terms of what you recall, it's not in line with your recollection of how things had happened? Is that what you would say?
Yes, that is what I said. When I indicated that I initiated when I got the message from his principal.
Yes.
I advised on what needed to be done.
Yes. I just can't remember whether he said he made the call on the afternoon, in the afternoon of the day of the cabinet meeting, because if he made the call after the 3rd, you probably wouldn't have been surprised because you had signed the presidential minute by that time. Therefore, you would definitely know that he had been transferred to your department. Is that right?
It's right, Chairperson, because for me, it's prior to signing the presidential minute will be a consideration by cabinet of,
Yes.
of that move. Something that I then said, I thought in the records of government, we do have such information. Something that is being reported to me that such information is not there.
Yes. And his package that he got when he left DPSA, my recollection is that there was some portion of the package which might have been considered to be more than what he would ordinarily be entitled to, but that when he gave evidence in November, the second time he appeared here, he seemed to suggest that there was a portion that was included in his package on the basis that it was being recognized that the manner in which he had been transferred from GCIS there was something not good about it. I'm putting it in my own words. There was some unfairness. So as a way of giving recognition to that, there was some amount there. I may not be putting it as accurately as he himself put it, but do you recall anything along the lines that in the package that he got, there was something that was meant to convey the message to him that we know that the way in which you left GCIS might not have been the best way or might not have been fair, and therefore we are adding something on your package that you are taking home.
Yes, in fact, when he exited DPSA, it was initiated by him. It was not initiated by the executive authority.
Yes.
And in a situation like that, the exit management is done that this person is resigning. Now, the payout to a person who's resigning and the payout to a person whose contract is redetermined is not the same. So I have indicated that I took a decision to then say, look, I did not initiate his departure. The fact that is departing, because it was 6 or 7 months after coming into the DPSA. I took a decision to then say, for him not to be worse off, let's consider that whatever motivates his departure could be part of the baggage of where he is coming from. And I agreed that we work on the determination, and that's what he actually welcomed to say. That is a fair way of exit mechanism from public service. So it's in the manner, the quantum is informed by the manner of exit. You resign, you get a less payment because it's your decision to do that. But you have your contract redetermined. It's not your decision to do that. Then there is a formula that is actually used to take care of that. So I took that decision to then say, really, if we remove the baggage of where it is coming from, there's really nothing that explains why he had to leave. If we then say had to leave like that, or then say to him, okay, it's a resignation, we'll pay you at this level. So that is what explains the difference. It's in the exit mechanism, Chairperson.
But from what you are saying, as I understand you, you are saying that there was something, but it was based on the fact that he was departing from DPSA, not from GCIS, as a result of a redetermination of his contract. So first, are you saying that the package that he got when he left DPSA had nothing to do with how he left GCIS, or was that a consideration as well?
By inference, to manage a fair exit on his part, I took that decision to then say, look, I have not taken a decision to then say you need to go. You are taking a decision that you are going. I think let's work on this to then say it's part of the baggage of your disappointment where you left before the end of the contract. So we calculated it and use a redetermination route and not a resignation route, just to make it, to address his exit, Chairperson.
So are you therefore saying that in part, how his package was formed was also influenced by how he had left GCIS in part?
Yeah, Chairperson, I'm saying my decision was that here is the DG, he says, I'm leaving. And he's leaving, he's resigning. It's definitely going on a lesser package. And it happens, it would not have been like this, it would not have landed with me, or it would not have landed with the DPSA if it was not the manner of exit from his previous position. So I took a decision to then say, let's work on this, that we treat it not as a resignation, but we treat it as redetermination.
So that decision on your part was influenced by, in part, how he left GCIS.
Yes, Chairperson.
That's right.
Yes, Chairperson.
And the fact that he was now leaving DPSA as well. But he had said he was resigning, and you considered a number of factors, including how he had left GCIS, and said, let's do this as a redetermination so that he would not get a lesser amount. Is that right?
That's right, Chairperson.
Yes. Now, he has said, as I understand his evidence, he has also said, after he came to DPSA, his relationship with you really didn't take off. Those are my words. Didn't take off. And he says he was not even introduced to staff. I don't know whether he puts it as he was not introduced at all, or he was not introduced properly to staff. And some staff members would say that they just heard from the media about that he was now the new DG. And he says what drove him to decide to leave, to talk to you and say, you know, he would like to leave, was that he felt unwelcome. And he says, you as minister were having meetings with members of his team, and decisions were being made without him being part of those decisions, and yet he was the accounting officer. And he says he thinks this was happening because of the manner in which he came to the department. Namely, as he puts it, because he was imposed on you on the day of the cabinet meeting which you did not attend. And because of how he came to the department, you never warmed up to him. The relationship between the two of you never warmed up. And ultimately he decided, look, he should go. Now you put a version that says, actually you are the one who came with the idea that he should be transferred to your department.
Exactly.
Now let me ask the question. what do you say about his concern or his evidence that, in effect, the relationship between the two of you never took off? What do you say about his evidence that you would meet with members of his team and decisions would be taken in meetings where he was not included and yet he was the accounting officer? Did that happen? Did that not happen?
Chairperson, I would not have initiated that he be transferred to DPSA if I did not like him. I will not have talked with him and then say, if he's worried in his hesitation, if he's worried that maybe at some stage he may have to leave or the contract may, the period may be short, I would not have said, DG, I'm even prepared to extend the contract. I would not have said that, Chairperson.
Of course, he says you never said any of those things.
Yes.
At least prior to him coming to DPSA.
I agree, Chairperson. I've seen that, and that surprised me. He is saying that, and I am saying this. Now,
I interrupted you. Please feel free to continue to make your points.
yes, I was saying that I wouldn't have done those things. I wouldn't have even then said, when he was insisting to leave, I wouldn't, because in my discussion, Chair, I indicated in the beginning that when I was talking to him, he indicated that he might not be long in the public service. And then when he decided like that, it was just out of my own decision to then say, but fine, he can't leave worse off in a situation like that. I took that decision. There was no stage, Chairperson, where I sidelined him in the department. I don't know of such. And to my recollection, I never deliberately took a decision. I treated him like any other DG. By the time I was working with him, there were other DGs, I think 4 to 5 of the other sections of the DPSA. And my treatment to all of them were the same. So I never did that.
Are you saying that you never had meetings with members of his team where important decisions were taken without him, for which he would be required to account as accounting officer?
I can't remember that, and I can't imagine that such could happen. I'm not that bad a person to can do that, Chairperson. I would not have done that. So that's why I was so surprised when I saw what he indicated in the submission. So honestly speaking, Chairperson, the relations between me and him was a normal relationship.
Well, let me make this point. My understanding of his evidence is not that he says you had anything personal against him. That's not my understanding of his evidence. My understanding of his evidence is that he says you may have done things the way you did them, and your relationship, the two of you, might not have taken off simply because of how he was imposed on you. So we go back to that version about whether he came to DPSA because you wanted him to come to DPSA, you came with the idea that he must be transferred to your department, or whether he was imposed in circumstances where a decision was taken hastily, that your department is the one to which he should go, because the ENCA had got wind of his move from GCIS.
Chair, I initiated Mr. Maseko's transfer to the department. He was not imposed on me. It's a pity that Minister Chabane is no more. He would be in a position. There's a person I talked to, and that's when we agreed on the approach to do all those things. He was not imposed on me. So, and I initiated that those things should happen. So, Chair, I'm stating that, and I beg the Commission to consider that my vision, as far as I'm concerned, is my vision and reflect what happened at the time. I have indicated that in the cracks of oblivion in the past, you might find that when I objected to the use of a strong word of being confused and stuff like that, but with your clarification that in a positive light, that may mean that it actually affects both of us. And it might be polluting our judgment, including his. That's why he is saying what he's saying, and I'm saying what I am saying. If there was a way of proving what I'm saying, that will be something that it will come out clear. That's why even in the letter of Minister Chabane, he will not have said, I concur, if somebody has not raised it. That is the situation.
Yes. Just the last question. So on your version, what is it that made Mr. Masego to stay so short a period at DPSA if otherwise the relationship between the two of you was normal, was fine? Because he was there for a very short time, I think from February to July of the same year, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right about the short period?
You are right, Chairperson.
Yes.
And I indicated in my statement that was the issue. And I sketched out possibilities or scenarios about that in my statement. Trying to articulate myself on the surprise of his early exit. Included in what I said was that when I discussed with him about that, about transfer to the department, he hinted on his decision to not stay long.
Yes.
So when it came out that he then says he is leaving, I thought maybe it's
the previous
maybe
discussion.
Maybe it's part of what he said.
Okay.
And I couldn't stand on his way.
Yes.
And if it was to be proven, it will actually be established that I said, if is that you're not interested in being a DG line function thing, we could even work together. You'll be an advisor. These are things, Chairperson, that I said. And I could not do all these things if there was anything. But the issue is, it was not imposed on DPSA. I initiated it.
Thank you. Anything arising?
No, Chair.
Nothing. Thank you. Mr. Baloyi, thank you very much. It's been a long day, but we have come to the end. If we do need you to come back, we'll ask you to come back. I would say that insofar as you believe some further investigation may be required to try and see whether there may be further documents that may be obtained from the Department of Public Service and Administration or from the Cabinet Secretary, please feel free with your legal advisors to do the necessary. The legal team will reflect on your request that the commission should consider doing something further. They'll reflect and they will let me know after they've reflected. But from your side, don't wait for the commission if you believe there is something you can do to try and get the information, so that should the commission think that what it has done is more than enough, if you find something, certainly come and share it with the commission. But they will reflect, and I think they probably would need to give you an indication of where they stand on the issue. Is that all right?
It's fine, thank you,
Okay.
Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You are excused.
Sure.
Ms. Hofmeyer,
Thank you, Chair.
sorry you have been standing there
No, that's fine.
for a long
I'm
time.
getting used to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are going to adjourn. I think tomorrow we are starting at 9 o'clock, I think, with the evidence of Mr. Chabane, I think, yeah. Okay, we are going to adjourn for the day. We adjourn.
All rise.